Hello, my name is Christopher Scott from the ChristopherScottBlog.com, and today I'm going to teach about the 7 reasons nonprofit organizations have trouble recruiting volunteers. So in addition to the 10 years of experience that I have working in nonprofit organizations, working with volunteers, is that I also have gotten to teach at the Center for Nonprofit Management in Dallas, Texas, where I get to go through workshops with people about how to find, lead, and keep volunteers. And so some of this material that I'm going to share with you is some of the material that I regularly teach in those workshops. So today we're going to go over the 7 basic reasons that nonprofits usually have trouble recruiting volunteers. I want to start with a quote by Bill Hybels from his book, The Volunteer Revolution on page 25, where he says, "Too many willing-hearted volunteers have been wounded on the job. They've responded to an invitation to serve only to end up in a volunteer position that was poorly conceived, resulting in tasks that few people find fulfilling. Or these volunteers show up to serve and discover they have nothing to do. An underprepared volunteer coordinator has wasted their time, causing them to lose precious hours they had willingly carved out from their busy schedule. Some work hard on menial tasks without ever hearing how their efforts serve a grander cause. They are given plenty of work, but no vision. Others have felt overwhelmed by unreasonable demands for which they're given plenty of work, but no vision. Others have felt overwhelmed by the unreasonable demands which they've received without proper training. Rather than being set up to win, they get put on the express lane to frustration and failure. Many have been hurt when a coercive leader drafted them to quote-unquote fill a slot without considering their gifts or talents or what they love to do. Some have given hours, maybe even years, in volunteer service to an organization or church without ever receiving a single thanks." That's from Bill Hybels' book, The Volunteer Revolution, page 25. So for today, I want to share with you the 7 reasons that most nonprofits have trouble recruiting volunteers. This material is based on some research that I have done, and I tried to bring that research together into 7 basic reasons that nonprofits have trouble working with volunteers. And the main reason, number 1, that nonprofits have trouble recruiting volunteers is a lack of training for staff working with volunteers. Research shows that organizations that invest training in staff about how to work with volunteers and lead volunteers usually have the best ability to recruit and keep volunteers. So in other words, organizations that put money into training staff about how to work with volunteers usually have the least amount of trouble recruiting volunteers, if that makes sense. So training is important for staff about how to work with volunteers because it tells staff how to express gratitude to volunteers, how to treat them correctly, how to communicate with volunteers in a kind way, how to train and coach volunteers on specific tasks when they don't do things correctly, and how to help volunteers be part of a team. So that's the first reason that nonprofits have trouble recruiting volunteers, is a lack of training for staff about how to work with volunteers. The second reason that nonprofits have trouble recruiting volunteers is that some nonprofits utilize too many recruitment methods. So research has shown that the more recruitment methods an organization has, the less volunteers they actually recruit. So the more ways that you try to use to recruit volunteers doesn't necessarily mean you're going to find more success. Some of the most successful nonprofits had found 1 or 2 or 3 really successful ways to recruit volunteers, and they stuck to those methods and kept at them and didn't spray their material everywhere hoping it would land somewhere. The third reason that nonprofits experience trouble recruiting volunteers is that they expect a greater commitment from older volunteers. So these have been organizations where they're looking for older volunteers to serve in their work, but they only make volunteer positions that require a large time commitment because they figure, hey, these people are retired, they got plenty of time. However, research shows that you need to create volunteer positions that have a lot of time needed, and then others that only require a little bit of time, because people who are retired or older don't always want to invest 10 or 20 hours a week volunteering. Another reason that nonprofits have trouble recruiting volunteers is that they're small. So research has shown that the larger nonprofit organizations usually have less problems recruiting volunteers simply because they're larger, they have better name recognition When people think about volunteering, the first ideas that pop into their minds are the organizations that they know and the organizations that are well known. Another reason that nonprofits have trouble recruiting volunteers is a lack of funds to support volunteers. So volunteering ultimately requires not just time and effort from people to volunteer, but sometimes it involves them spending money, obviously, to drive to and from the volunteer positions. Sometimes volunteers might need to bring their own lunch or bring their own tools to do the ministry or the work that they're planning to do. So when nonprofits don't provide those necessary things for volunteers, research shows that people are less likely to volunteer if they have to invest their own finances. So lack of funds to support volunteers shows that those type of nonprofits are going to have less success recruiting volunteers. The sixth reason that nonprofits have trouble recruiting volunteers is simple staff indifference. This is when volunteers show up and the staff don't really care if the volunteers are there. They don't take the time to explain the positions to volunteers, things like that. So the sixth reason is just basic staff indifference. And then the last reason that nonprofits have trouble recruiting volunteers is actually 8 additional reasons that I was able to pull from Aubrey Malphurs' material that I have online on churchcentral.com. So he provides 8 reasons lay people don't get involved in ministry. So this is a little bit more specific to churches. So this is our 7th reason nonprofits have trouble recruiting volunteers. But within the 7th reason, there's actually 8 reasons because we're kind of looking at the church side, if that makes sense. So Aubrey Malphurs provides 8 reasons that lay people don't get involved in ministry. The first is that they don't know what's available. They don't volunteer simply because they don't know what's available for them to volunteer for. The second is they are waiting for a personal invitation. They might be sitting on the sidelines. They might be willing to help. They're just waiting for someone to approach them and say, hey, we have this need. I was hoping that you could fill this need. The third is that people think that it is what the paid staff is supposed to do. So they don't volunteer because they think, well, we're paying staff to do that. Shouldn't they be doing that? The fourth reason that lay people don't get involved in ministry is because they believe God won't use them like God would use a pastor. So this comes from the idea that some people think God has called pastors to be in the ministry and to do the work, and they don't want to volunteer because they think God has specially equipped pastors with education and training and ability and divine enablement to do it. The fifth reason that people don't get involved in ministry is because they've always done it that way. They've never been involved, they've never taught Sunday school, they've never volunteered at church, so they just don't. It's just the way that things have always gone. The sixth reason that lay people don't get involved in ministry is that some pastors want to do the ministry because it provides job security. So this is a reason that people don't get involved in ministry and volunteer simply because the person overseeing the area where volunteers should serve, the pastor does all the work because it provides him job security. The seventh reason that people don't get involved in churches and ministry as volunteers is a lack of time and ability of the lay people. Honestly, some people are just busy. They got a full-time job, they got kids, they got other things. They just don't have time to get involved. And then eighth, they think the pastor should do the ministry because he's paid, is the eighth reason that people don't get involved in ministry. And those are 8 reasons lay people don't get involved in ministry from Aubrey Malphurs' video on the churchcentral.com website. So this has been 7 reasons that nonprofits struggle to recruit volunteers. Those reasons have been staff is indifferent to volunteers, there's a lack of funds to support volunteers, nonprofits that are small are going to naturally have more trouble recruiting volunteers than nonprofits that are large. Another reason nonprofits have trouble is if they expect a greater commitment from older volunteers as the only option, utilizing too many recruitment methods, and lastly, lack of training for staff working with volunteers. So thanks again for watching this video. This has been 7 reasons nonprofits have trouble recruiting volunteers. If you want to learn more about volunteer recruitment leadership, you can go to my blog at christopherscottblog.com. Thanks.